Coming to you on Monday, June the 24th, over the lunch hour Eastern Time. It is the 25th episode of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. I'm Scott MacArthur. He is Rich Griffin. And we titled the 24th episode, recorded last week, and available wherever you get your podcasts, and on our YouTube page at youtube.com/@exitphilosophy. The sustainability quandary. This was after the Jays had beaten the Guardians 2 out of 3 in Toronto. And we said, look, Horwitz, Barger, these guys, keep playing them. Don't know if it's sustainable, but for as long as it's working, roll with it. And Griff, since then, we uploaded that episode. We also did a live post-game show after Wednesday's series sweeping loss to Boston. And the Jays haven't won since. The sustainability quandary is more quandary than sustainable.
Oh my God. It's we were thinking of getting to the All-Star break around 500 either way, a couple of games under, a couple of games over, and that would be a success story. And even when I asked John Schneider about it on that last homestand, I said, would being at 500 at the All-Star game, would that be a success? And he at first admitted yes, and then realized what he just said, that he doesn't mind losing as much as he wins. But in this case, he would settle for that in a heartbeat if he could do that now after 6 straight losses and a bullpen that looks as shaky as it looks on paper, and a starting rotation that should be giving you more and isn't. It's to me, the biggest thing is that when a Blue Jays starting pitcher misses location in the middle of the plate, it gets crushed. And when an opposing starting pitcher misses in the middle of the plate, it gets fouled off or taken for a strike. And to me, that's the big difference that you cannot quantify and overcome if you're going to keep that up.
Yeah. Vladdy's had some pretty good swings, but you're speaking generally, and I agree with you. And it gets back to the more general comment, which is this just isn't a very good team. And this is just not a very good offensive team. And I feel, Griff, that, and it's human nature. It's a desire to see your favorite team in whatever sport perform to a high level. I feel that people have been trying to talk themselves into this team being more than it is, that they're at some point the switch is going to flip and they're going to reach their potential.
I know I'm guilty of that.
Well, no, but I think we've been pretty clear on this podcast, generally speaking. Like, you and I weren't talking in March that some offensive juggernaut was about to be unleashed on Major League Baseball come opening day in Tampa Bay. That this lineup was hot. We were griping in March about, so what do they do after 3? What do they do after 4 in the lineup? And we didn't know that Bo Bichette was going to have a bad season at that point. And so they've had issues in the 2-hole as well. Like we couldn't have even envisioned some of the struggles that they ended up having, but we envisioned some of the struggles that they have had because they seem to be pretty apparent.
One thing that we were both in agreement on was that this front office had sold out on the fact that their pitchers needed defensive support. And if they could excel in run prevention, and this goes to what you were just saying, if they could excel in run prevention, then the bats would find their level and there would be improvement from the guys coming back. But like the signings of Daniel Vogelbach and Kevin Kiermaier and Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who's doing a job better than anyone thought, like those weren't moves that were going to take you to the next level in terms of competing in the American League East. But they felt like with their starting rotation, with Alek Manoah set to come back, with Yariel Rodriguez as the depth starter, that all they needed to do was prevent the other team from scoring and eke out a few. They're eking out all right. They've got 46 games with 4 runs or fewer, which is ridiculous. But yeah, it's not working out, and somebody should be taking the fall for this.
Well, Ross Atkins was in the dugout before yesterday's game. And again, we're talking to you on Monday, June the 24th in Cleveland, and Hazel May on the Sportsnet pregame show got Ross for a couple of minutes. And one of the comments he made was that I am accountable for this. And quite frankly, I don't really know what that means. I mean, those are words and people say them, and I'm not coming down on Ross for uttering that sentence, Griff, because what else are you going to say? I mean, you had better say something like that in the very same way that Mark Shapiro last October said, look, this is on me. I'm the president and CEO of this baseball team, so whatever happens is my responsibility. But words don't matter now. Actions do. And here's just a little thing. If you're listening right now, or if you're watching on YouTube, take your phone out. Don't interrupt our talk here. Listen as we go through this. Pull up your phone and type in Toronto Blue Jays logo into Google. Hit enter, then click images, and you'll see the logo come up. What's the first thing you feel when you see that logo right now? Happiness? Who do you think of? Jose Bautista has been off this team for 7 years. Who do you think of when you see that logo? How do you feel when you see that logo? I'm guessing there's a lot of disappointment, anger, and I'm thinking, Griff, because we've all lived in an environment where people are held to account in their lines of work. I think there are a lot of people going, man, it must be nice to be making millions of dollars running this product out there, and just like another day goes by and nothing changes. And then the next day goes by and nothing changes. Like the inertia right now is stunning to me.
I think
and I've always been concerned that there are way more words than actions with this front office, and that's dated years. I'm on the record with that. And it's just seeing it play out as a native GTAer who grew up with that baseball team, who covered that baseball team for a period of time. I'm pissed off.
Yeah, I think the danger for this front office group, and thus the ownership group, is that the disappointment and anger you talk about is going to lead next to apathy. And that is a big concern for this team, because they had a big celebration of the renovations to the stadium. And I keep pounding on this point that they haven't sold the inventory yet. But I read I read this morning in the Sun about Olive Garden, and their solution to a diminishing business, according to the Sun, was that they are now going to raise prices across the board to see if that solves their problem. And it reminded me of what the Blue Jays have done. They've alienated. I mean, I talked to a lot of ordinary fans who have been season ticket holders for a long time. And the renovations to the stadium meant that the prices of their original tickets went up, and they were shifted to poorer locations for their seats. And now if this team goes south for the rest of the season, which it's hard not to see it doing, especially if they become any kind of a seller at the deadline, like Bo Bichette or Kikuchi or some of these players that have some value, what's going to happen to the fan base? Because those prices aren't going down because this team sucks this year. I mean, we talked about it earlier. In 2019, when Bo and Vlad came in as rookies, that team, they saved the season in terms of interest, but that team lost 95 games. Now, there's no Bo, there's no Vlad coming up, and there's some good young players, but nobody who captures the imagination like those two guys. And if this team finishes under 500, what does that do for the fan base moving forward to 2025, much less the end of the 2024 season? I don't know.
Well, you remember, Griff, after Anthopoulos made those moves in late 2012 with the Marlins and Mets, there was a considerable bump in attendance for 2013. And that was the first year with Reyes and Burley. Josh Johnson couldn't stay healthy, but everybody says that team 74 and 88 and what a disappointment, and R.A. Dickey was crap. And I'm like, yeah, but that team was supposed to have Josh Johnson and Brandon Morrow at the front of the rotation.
Right.
Dickey was just supposed to be a guy, and Johnson and Morrow didn't stay healthy. And then, of course, they just weren't a good team. It just didn't work. And that pivoted into 2014, where I don't think there was like a precipitous attendance drop, but 2014 was just a popcorn fart of a season. 83 wins, 79 losses. They had that really hot May, and then the Cardinals came to Rogers Center in early June. Jaime Garcia and a couple of other starting pitchers swept them out of the building, and they died the rest of the way. And if you remember, in 2015, this is before the excitement of David Price and that mad, crazy week before the trade deadline, there were some nights in early 2015 where that building had probably less than 10,000 real people. I'm not talking about tickets sold, 10,000 real people inside it. And then the excitement came back when, the trade deadline happened and Tulowitzki and Price and others came in. But I'm not quite clear on what the path is going to be here.
Well, the path here is going to be, and the big difference between 2015 and this team, I think, lies in run differential. And we were suspecting that in 2015, because of the huge positive run differential, that the front office led by Alex Anthopoulos realized that there was potential, that this team was a very good team at its base and just needed some help, needed some supplemental help, which he did in spades. I mean, he brought in some really good players, the exact players that they needed to take them back to the playoffs. But this team, this 24 team, the run differential is probably, I think, 70, 80 games under. Minus 70
I want to get that right. It's in the minus 40s somewhere, I think.
Oh, is it?
Tampa Bay is worse.
Yeah. And like that's the indicator that they will not be doing the same thing that they did in 2015. Plus, it's a different personality of a front office where Alex Anthopoulos was willing to roll the dice at any time and was willing to do it again in 2016 and 17 if he was going to be around beyond when Mark Shapiro entered the scene. But this group does not seem to be willing. This isn't a group of gamblers. This is a group of, as we've discussed earlier, run prevention, which Blue Jays fans are not big fans. I mean, they want to see home runs. They want to see runs. They want to see excitement, and they're not seeing it with this team. All they're seeing is a grind where if they're in a game, they hand it to the bullpen in late innings. And when Jimmy Garcia and Jordan Romano aren't available, it becomes even more of a grind. Who do you give the ball to? I don't think Chad Green has excited too many people with his performance. He's a usable 7th or 8th inning guy, but as a closer, I think he's showing that they need either Jimmy or Jordan Romano back. But the bottom line is that there's nothing to tell this front office, let's roll the dice, because the group surrounding the dice roll isn't going to be good enough.
So the Jays right now have a negative 50 run differential, which is actually better than Tampa Bay's negative 62. But there's that. And then the Blue Jays are also one of 4 teams currently in Major League Baseball that have yet to reach the 300 runs scored mark. The other 3 are the Chicago White Sox, the Oakland A's, and the Miami Marlins. Every other team has scored more than 300 runs so far this season. And I've heard some opinions and read some stories on what to do in the immediate here, Griff, because it appears that this is headed toward some kind of sell at the trade deadline. And you and I described it, or at least I used the phrase, I won't, if you don't agree, I won't put words in your mouth. But in our live post game after the final game of the Red Sox series last Wednesday night. I said, this is a season in crisis. And it hasn't decrisified over the weekend. There have been 3 losses since, and now they're going into Fenway. And oh, by the way, the Red Sox, for the most part, have kept winning. So what do you do with the front office? And I've been reading and hearing, well, you don't typically fire a general manager in the middle of a season. It's just not commonly done. My response to that, and you know what? I can tilt this if you're watching on YouTube. Look at those lights. Light bulb actually literally on over my head. A light bulb went off. I'm thinking to myself, maybe this is part of the problem. Maybe this ownership doesn't do things the way that they're typically done. Maybe there's just not a smart process about this. So let's go back 10 years. It is not normal to have a president at the time, Paul Beeston, and call Paul Beeston's best friend, unbeknownst to Beeston, the owner of the Chicago White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, and say, hey, can we talk to your team president, Kenny Williams, who, if you're a longtime Blue Jays fan, you'll remember played briefly for the Blue Jays in 1989. We'd like to bring we'd like to bring Kenny Williams to Toronto to be the president, replace Paul Beeston, because we're looking to get rid of Beeston. We're done with him. Don't want him around anymore. The board doesn't like him, or whatever the hell the case may be. Well, what's Reinsdorf going to do? Unbeknownst to Edward Rogers and that Ray guy. Well, he's going to call Beeston and say, hey, get a load of this. They're looking to replace you. And Beeston's going to say what? And that was Tracy Ringolsby and Bob Elliott, who were all over that story at the 2014 winter meetings. What comes of that? Another thing that's not commonly done. Well, we're not particularly connected in the baseball world. Edward Rogers spends a lot of time disconnected from reality because he never really need to be involved in it as the son of a billionaire entrepreneur. So he's not really connected in the baseball world and doesn't really surround himself with people who are. So, Jesus, how am I going to replace this president? Well, I got to call the league. So I call the league. The commissioner, Rob Manfred, is going to get involved and help here. Well, Manfred has friends all over the place. And, geez, there's this guy in Cleveland. They're kind of fed up with him there. And he hasn't really been involved in the baseball side of things for a few years. And he needs a landing spot. My buddy Mark Shapiro, he's smart, and I don't deny Shapiro's smart guy. But that facilitates Mark Shapiro landing in Toronto. I know he wasn't formally hired till later in the year, but he effectively arrived in July. Well, the previous administration, headed by Beeston as the non-baseball president, the president of the business, and Alex Anthopoulos running the baseball team, are still doing their thing. So even though he's not involved, he is there. He's the future boss, if not the current boss. And then he starts admonishing the current general manager of the time, Anthopoulos, for the moves Anthopoulos makes in late July, to the point that Anthopoulos is like, I don't really want to stay. This isn't going to work because I'm going to have to be the front-facing, public-facing figure, but I'm not going to actually get to make any decisions because I'm going to have to take everything I want to do to Mark, and he's either going to thumbs up it or thumbs down it. I'm going to leave. So Alex leaves. But Edward Rogers freaks out and is like, I didn't expect this. What? Does an end around Mark Shapiro back to Alex Anthopoulos and says, I'll give you $10 million on a 5-year contract, 2 a year to stay and work under Mark. And Alex is like, I'm okay, thanks. I'm going to go elsewhere. None of what I just described, Griff, is common. None of what I just described is functional. None of what I just described is par for the course. And so I have no idea where this is headed. I've been clear on my feelings about this front office, but I also, in the next breath, and I've acknowledged this before, have absolutely no faith in the people who would have to make the decision to replace the front office if the replacing included the president, Mark Shapiro.
Yeah, I think that your point of this not being a traditional situation is accurate. And also part of that non-traditional is that on staff, they have James Click, who is already a World Series winning general manager. So when you say you don't replace a GM in midstream, traditionally, you just outlined why this is a non-traditional situation, and also the fact that they have a GM in place, a future GM in place, if they so desire, who's already won a World Series. Along those lines of being non-traditional, I think in terms of leading up to the trade deadline, and you've seen me change my opinion from Bo and Vlad have to stay, Bo and Vlad have to be signed, Bo and Vlad are the cornerstones of this team moving forward. Well, the way it's looking now, they lost 95 games in 2019 when Bo and Vlad showed up, and they could lose 85. They could lose 95, who knows? But the point is that it's not this era. The window is closing on the Bo and Vlad era. I think between now and the trade deadline, what they have to do is not play the opening day, the opening month lineup to see if it works, because we know it doesn't. What they need to do is find a lineup, play them every day. And to me, that lineup includes Isaiah Kiner-Falefa at third base, Spencer Horwitz at second base, Bo, Vlad, one of the two catchers every day, obviously. And then you have to put Davis Schneider in left field. You need to put Dalton Varsho in center field and figure out who you want to play right field. You're getting good defense out of George Springer, but that's not good enough. I mean, that could be historically worst offensive season of an outfielder in Major League Baseball. So can you platoon him with Addison Barger? Is there anybody else that can play out there? But you have to be consistent, see if you can sell the new excitement of that sort of a lineup to your fan base before you decide to trade Bo, before you decide to do anything at the deadline. But you can't just play the old guys and then at the deadline say, oh, this isn't working, and then substitute the young guys in with the hopes that they can carry it through the final 3 months. I think they have to see what works right now and then make a decision at the trade deadline, because the fan base is not on board with what's happening right now.
I mean, my argument for, at least at this point, changing the general manager, Griff, is that short of a 15 to 20 game winning streak that is definitely not coming.
Only 3 times through the rotation.
Can the pitchers hit? Well, they're not allowed to anymore. Actually, the Jays have always been in the American League. Never could unless they were visiting an NL park in the old rules. This isn't going to continue. This is over. It's over. Whether it's over on June 24th or July 24th or whatever the hell the final day of the regular season is, September 28th, October 1st. I can't remember what that Sunday is. It's over. So you cannot run this back.
Yeah. Are you saying that it's over? Would you say that 81 wins is the maximum that would you say this team is definitely going to finish under 500?
Well, if they trade Kikuchi and Jimmy Garcia, and who else could get moved? I don't know what team would see. I could see Justin Turner having a decent month, and maybe looking at him as a right-handed bat off the bench.
Yeah, but nobody's going to trade for Kiermaier because Kiermaier was available all winter and nobody was interested, and he hasn't done anything to up that value in terms of the trade market. So he's not going anywhere, and nobody's going to take on Springer unless the Blue Jays are paying the entire freight minus major league minimum or whatever it takes to get rid of him. But he's there, so they're tradable pieces. You've mentioned Kikuchi, Bo.
Yeah, like if Bo's included in this, then it becomes a much bigger deal. That's the path to not winning 81 and potentially getting into the 90 plus loss area, right? Is just to divest.
Well, at the trade deadline every season, going back as far as you want, at the trade deadline there may be a dozen teams, and this year it might even be more that are you could throw a blanket over because they're that close in the standings. But then you get teams that trade away assets, realizing that this is not going to be their year. They're realistic in their front office, and you get separation in the final 3 months. And if the Blue Jays trade some of these assets like Jimmy Garcia, Kikuchi, the separation is going to be the Jays moonwalking to the bottom of the overall major league standings. And so that's when the separation takes place. So to project how many games this team can win, it all changes if at the trade deadline they decide that they want some assets for 2025 and beyond. And they better get assets. If they're trading, they better get assets for 25 and beyond, and not 27, 28 and beyond, because this fan base will not put up with that.
Yeah. And, I've thought about it, Griff, because as we talked about, Ross Atkins spoke to Hazel May before Sunday's game in Cleveland. Who needs to speak? We need to hear from somebody. And that would tend to be my opinion. But then I think about it a little bit more, and I'm getting into my head and I'm going, what's the favorite pool game for the kids this summer? Marco Shapiro. The only difference is you never find him. But then I'm thinking, well, do I need to hear from him? Does it matter at this point? Because the results reflect the process. The actions speak louder than words, like they do in any facet of life. And words at this point are just carbon dioxide being expended from your body. I don't know what can be said at this point. We've already heard him take full responsibility verbally last October. We've heard Ross Atkins do that yesterday before the game. There's a lot of responsibility being taken. I don't know who's issuing the accountability. I'm not sure at this point. It just feels like this is in a rotten place.
Yeah, that's a great point, in that, do we really need to hear from Mark Shapiro if everything is going to be the same, if it's just going to be words encouraging the fan base that this is moving forward into the future? I think the only time you would want to necessarily hear from Mark Shapiro is if there's going to be major changes in the front office, or some sort of a trade that could improve the club moving forward this year. But yeah, at this point, if he stepped up and said, I'd like to, what you're getting. You're getting the same thing, as you point out, that was at the end of last year. That it's a process and we're moving forward, and the numbers in the farm system might not look that great, but individually we've got 30 prospects scattered around the levels, and you will be seeing them at Rogers Center sometime soon, maybe sooner than you might think. Yeah. But so I'm not big on the need to hear from Mark Shapiro. I'm big on needing to show a change of direction and a show of faith, and quit BSing the fans with just double talk.
I wasn't around covering the team, and I was working in Ottawa in both news and covering hockey. So I feel sort of a personal disconnect to the entire black and blue Blue Jays era. Obviously have an appreciation for Roy Halladay or what have you. But Griff, I was living in another city, as I just said, covering a different sport, working a day job in news on top of that. There just wasn't a whole lot of Toronto Blue Jays in my life in that period relative to my even younger days and my more recent days. But it always felt from a million miles away, if that's what Ottawa is to Toronto, that JP Ricciardi had a feeling like he knew baseball and all you dumb Canadians didn't.
Correct.
And I'll say about Ricciardi, at least my interpretation of him, is that nobody can accuse JP Ricciardi of not being authentic. What bothers me And you can like him or dislike him, but I never really felt like JP Ricciardi wasn't being his authentic self. These guys, I just don't really think have the capability of being authentic. They don't speak like human beings. John Schneider is, quote, at the forefront of our environment, which is my latest favorite. Stuff like nobody talks like that. I just don't think they relate to people. And if they're not relating to people, and I'm not talking when the microphones are on, Griff, I'm talking in one-on-one, off to the side conversations. How are you doing? And then this long drawn out weird answer about some minute issue. We all have examples. Like, it's just like, dude, be a person. Take the batteries out of your back. Because if it's like that with us, it's definitely running through the culture of that whole place. And what bothers me, I was texting with somebody else in the media about this last night. It's like, I felt this about these guys for a long time. And I just despise the fact that it's gotten to this point where the results are so bad that it feels irreversible and that it's gone on for too long. And I feel like there's some kind of like unspoken contempt. We're just going to continue to do this our way. Boys, you've had 9 years. You've failed. Go away. It's over.
Yeah, it's funny. I just came off recording a Griff's conversation with Kevin Malone, who was the 94 GM of the Expos. And it's available on our YouTube channel, and it's available on griffsthepitch.com. One of the questions I asked Kevin was the difficulty. It's not always easy going from a team on a limited budget like he did with the Montreal Expos in 94, 95, and then later going to the Dodgers as GM with an unlimited budget. And he admitted all the failures that he had in that regard. And it seems to me that it's the same issue coming from Cleveland with the Indians for Shapiro and Ross Atkins, and then coming here, and it evolved into where they're one of the top spending teams, the top 10 in total payroll, and they just didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know the most efficient way of spending the money. Would, in hindsight, the most efficient way of spending the George Springer money have been that? I would have to say, since they're stuck with 2 more years, that the answer to that would be no. So it's not as easy, and they are afraid to admit any mistake, even though it's obvious, and fans realize that it's obvious, and that you and I realize that it's obvious, and they just, if they would just say, yes, we messed up here, we messed up there, we miscalculated, we shouldn't have relied so much on run prevention because we're not scoring enough runs, but they don't do that.
Yeah, it's you see, the thing is, and I'm seeing comments online, Griff, and people are pissed, and rightfully so, but it's, and you were touching on it a little bit earlier about, beer is really expensive now, and food is really expensive, and they've done a lot of really nice renovations, so you can almost get caught. I went through it last May, the first game I attended in the Half News Stadium, because they hadn't done the infield yet, but they'd done the outfield, and you get caught looking around, and look at that little sort of bar that you can sidle up to, and look at this area where you can stand around with a couple of friends and just chat as the game happens to be going on over there. And, oh, we got to go sit in the bleacher seats for an inning. Like, a lot of cool things. I'm not dismissing any of that, but it's a lot of shiny object stuff. And then you walk out of there and you take a look at your bank balance the next morning and you're like, oh, yeah.
It is pretty cool up there, but
oh, no, it is. Like, I thumbs it up. I think a lot of people have, but it's separate. You end up separated from your money pretty quickly. But that, the Sky Dome in 1989, Griff, and we know that Camden Yards came along. I noticed how I very quickly ignore Comiskey 2,
Yeah.
because Comiskey 2 came before Camden Yards, but it was very mechanical, and they've done a nice job in trying to improve that through renovations over the years, at least made it better. But Camden Yards came along, and then what was then Jacobs Field, now Progressive Field in Cleveland, and on it went through the 90s, all these beautiful retro style new stadiums. And the Sky Dome, when the Jays stopped winning in the mid 90s, everybody was like, well, the stadium sucks. Well, 6 years ago, it was a technical marvel, right? And so these amenities in Rogers Center aren't going to hold people's attention for years and years to come. The product on the field is what's going to matter. And, you know, you and I could sit here 3 years from now, Griff, be talking about a team that's on pace to win 97 games in a division and go, holy crap, they or whoever replaced them pulled this thing up, and look at what they've got. But as I sit here right now, knowing that the chair of the company that owns the team is weird and uncomfortable and volatile and not that smart, and the front office has been so interwoven now for essentially a decade, and how, if they've got to extract that front office, are they going to replace it and do it competently? Like I just don't see Bo Bichette. I mean, there's just murmurs. Like, I think it's kind of a fait accompli that he walks at the end of next year if he isn't traded before that. Vladdy, I think it's difficult to predict what might be going on in his mind. He may be looking for a fresh start if he isn't traded before the end of the 2025 season. I just can't believe, Griff. I had worries, but I never thought it would get to this point. I really don't. And it is catastrophically a failure if this era ends without a single playoff game win.
They're becoming the Olive Garden of Major League Baseball. Before we
and you can't ask them to like build it up again over the next 7 to 10 years. They've got to go. If this era ends, need new POVs, man, points of view.
Before we run out of time, I think we need to talk about, of course, we need to talk about the number 2 prospect in the Blue Jays organization, who was brought up 5 days or less than a week ago, or Elvis Martinez, and what happened with him, the sudden MLB suspension of 80 games, which is, you know, it's been on the books since 2005. So, you know, and there's been plenty of examples of players that have served a suspension, come back, and become major league stars. So it's not a career-ending incident, but to me, it just compounds and piles on the problems that this front office and this minor league system and this organization has been having. What's your opinion of the Elvis Martinez situation and how it's been explained?
Pronounce the name of the drug for me, Griff, so that is it clomiphene?
Yeah, it's clomiphene.
Clomiphene. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the fertility drug, or the claim. I guess it helps women who are struggling to get pregnant ovulate, and then in men, it somehow enhances testosterone production. I think you and I were talking. It tricks the body into believing it needs to produce more, so your testosterone numbers go up, something like that.
Yeah, that's the explanation by Dr. Google.
Yeah, and I celebrate my 45th birthday on Wednesday, so perhaps I'm at that age, Griff.
Yeah,
where it's time to clomiphene it up, baby. Clomiphene it up. So this is what, and look, you and I don't know the ins and outs of Elvis Martinez and his girlfriend's life, and is there any kind of legitimacy to this story? We were struggling to get pregnant and went to a doctor who prescribed this. We did it outside of the team because we wanted to keep our fertility challenges private. I mean, you've been behind closed doors with teams before, Griff, and you've probably helped to organize a lot of the presentations that players get on an annual basis, be they veterans, be they rookies, be they minor leaguers, the academies in Latin America or the minor league teams in the United States. Like these guys are told a lot of things. And I would think one of the things is, look, if you're going to put anything in your body, you got to communicate it to the team so that they can green light it so you don't get screwed. And that's number one. Number two, the next guy who gets an 80-game suspension for a performance-enhancing drug positive test, who doesn't have some kind of story that essentially is rooted in, I didn't know, I didn't mean to, I didn't know, will be the first. There's always a story. And ignorance a big problem in our world today, on much more important things than sports. Ignorance is not an excuse. That was my reaction. You got to take the 80 games and wear it.
To your point, over the last 20 years, there's been an awareness, since the drug program and the drug rules came into Major League Baseball after the 2004 season. There have been extra effort made to make sure that every year, either in the off season or I know the first day of spring training, that players are spoken to and it's explained to them, don't put anything in your body without knowing, without clearing it with the team in terms of ingredients. Is it possible that it would show up on a PED test? They're told that, and there's special efforts made to make sure the Spanish-speaking players are notified in their own language. And that's something that's been going on for 20 years. The second point is that I don't know anyone who at 22 years old, and he would have been 21 when he was going to the fertility clinic. I don't know anyone who at 21 years old, trying to establish himself in a new position, not sure where they're going to be living, moving around, whether it's Buffalo, whether it's New Hampshire, whether it's Toronto, that is so intent and to start a family at 21 years old with a woman who, let's say, is 20 or 21, that they go to a fertility clinic at that point. And in the when you look up, what did we say it was? Clomidine?
Clomiphene. Yeah.
Clomiphene. When you look up clomiphene online, it starts with the fertility clinic, and then the next question is, why do bodybuilders use clomiphene? And when they're one followed by the other, it's not a surprise to anyone that it is used as some sort of a performance enhancer by some people. And it explains about tricking the body, as you explained, into creating more testosterone and allowing for longer workouts, shorter recovery, which is the purpose of PEDs to begin with. Yes, they took the apology. Orelvis said that he will accept the penalty, the 80-game penalty, which brings him back in the final week of the 2024 season. He will be allowed to go down and work out at the player development complex in Dunedin if that's what they choose, which is just like during the pandemic when they went to Rochester for the alternate site. He's not going to play in games, but I think that he will still be able to continue his development as a player. And it's hard to buy the fact that he didn't know what he was doing in terms of this being a performance enhancer. I don't think it's going to kill his career. I think he's got a chance to come back. I wish that John Schneider hadn't said, well, it was great that he was turned around and he was honest with us. Who knows if he is or not? Let's prove that first, because there's so many caveats there. But you look at other players, Fernando Tatis, Emmanuel Clase, you got, remember, Miguel Tejada. even Marcus Stroman, who got nailed in Vancouver for 50 games back before he made it to the major leagues. It's just like, it's not going to kill his career, but it's just another example of the type of year for the Toronto Blue Jays that 2024 has become.
Well, and it's interesting because if you pull up Instagram, for example, sometimes 2-day old posts end up in your feed. And, there were some Blue Jays posts about Elvis's debut and his quote about being so thankful. And then, of course, he gets his first career big league hit and presents the ball to his family and all of those nice things that happen. And you juxtapose that with the news that came down before Sunday's game, and it's like, wow, you want to talk about riding Leviathan? I mean, you're going up the hill on the way to Cleveland, and then you're at the top Friday and Saturday, and then right down the hill on Sunday. And to extend the analogy of riding Leviathan, Griff, there will be future highs. I mean, we think he's a good player, and I'm 100% with you. I think you've noticed in our interaction about this so far, it's not like he needs to go. He doesn't deserve to play in the major leagues. No, he got nicked. He's going to be held accountable. He has no choice but to accept the suspension. So it's good that he's accepting it, because what the hell else is his alternative? Serve it and then come back. And I can guarantee you, if this front office is still in place at the end of September, they are really going to hope, because he's going to play, if they're out of it, and we expect they will be at this point, he's going to play in all 6 games when he gets back at the end of September, and they are going to hope against hope he hits at least a couple of home runs in those 6 games so that they can say, see, shiny toy for 2025 Blue Jays fans.
It's funny. There were 2 things that struck me on when Elvis made his debut in the lineup. He had been up for a few days, hadn't been in a game. I think he was there for all 3 games of the Red Sox series, but they didn't put him in. So it's in Cleveland. His family shows up. But first, it was his 4th spring training with the big league club. And I remember the first 2, and I was down in the dugout. I was covering. No, I was with the team then. I was working for the team. And I looked at this kid, 19 years old, 20 years old, and I'm thinking, this is a major leaguer. This guy carries himself at 19 and 20. He carries himself like a major leaguer. He's not shy. He's not in the background. So at that point, and after as many years as I've been in the game, I can recognize. So it's not like this guy is a wallflower, and it would surprise me if he made it as a major league player. The other thing was when I looked at his father, who's like hugely muscled, and he was cheering his son when he got the base hit and whatever. Honestly, went through my head, wow, I can see where Elvis gets his size and strength. No one will ever accuse this kid of being on steroids. And God, 24 hours later, look what happened. And I laughed to myself, because I said the same thing about Marcus Stroman's dad, who was a Long Island cop and was just huge. But in that regard, I was thinking that maybe his dad had given him some stuff to make him stronger, and whether it was a mistake, whether he knew, or whether he was trying to slip one by the Blue Jays at the time. But I always look at the parents to see what kind of body type the kid might have. And I got fooled by Elvis's family, by his dad. But it's funny that those 2 things stand out. And like we've been talking about, it doesn't mean it's the end of his career. The prime example is Fernando Tatis Jr., who's overcome it. Nelson Cruz was another years ago who was suspended by MLB and came back and had a borderline Hall of Fame career. So yeah, they'll keep him around. I wish they wouldn't keep him at the player development complex, because they got 100 impressionable young 18 to 22-year-olds that don't need to see this guy walking around on the restricted list being treated like everybody else. They could send him home. He could work out in the Dominican complex that the Blue Jays have on the island, and the same effect. It would be the same effect. He's not. I disagree with you. I don't think he's going to be in the lineup, the final week of the season. I think they need to have him play Dominican Winter League ball and then come to spring training with a fresh start.
I think they want him at their very best facility for the next 80 plus days. It's 80 games, so however many days, probably 90 if you factor in off days, or 95.
Yeah.
I think they want him at their very best facility because they absolutely need him to be a guy if they happen to hold on beyond this season. The front office, they need player development win stories, Griff, because they don't have anywhere near enough of them, especially how they arrived in Toronto with a reputation for player development under the theory that they had to do that in Cleveland because they just didn't have the budget. I want to make a comment about John Schneider, the manager, if I could. I'm of the view with John Schneider that he should not wear this. And what I mean by that isn't to say that he doesn't deserve some level of accountability, and it doesn't mean that you and I aren't going to have conversations about in-game decisions that get made that we don't like or what have you. But the managerial merry-go-round, like, it's not even 2 years as we sit here right now that Charlie Montoyo was fired. I'm past that with these guys as front office. The job, in my opinion, is and should be John Schneider's until those above him are replaced, and then those above him can determine whether John Schneider continues. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a death sentence. Brian Snitker was inherited by Alex Anthopoulos in Atlanta 6 or 7 years ago now, and is still the manager of the Atlanta Braves. That worked. John Gibbons got 3 seasons. The last 2, they were kind of walking the plank looking to turn over the roster. But John Gibbons got 3 seasons under Shapiro and Atkins, 16, 17, and 18 before his time with the Blue Jays ended. So there are examples of guys who maybe are inherited as placeholders, but then the perception changes. And I'm not saying John Schneider's one of the best 30 qualified people for this job, but he is the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays right now and should remain so until the new front office, thinking that there at least will be partly one, makes a decision on him.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that if they, if John Schneider was replaced at any point shortly, that it would come back to bite Ross Atkins in the ass, because it would be seen as a scapegoat, making a scapegoat out of the manager. And like you said, he's not necessarily one of the top 30 managers. Well, he is one of the top 30 managers in baseball, in Major League Baseball.
He has a job.
30
yeah.
teams.
Yeah.
But I think that what he needs to work on is his body language in the dugout. And I'm big on body language in pro sports. He looks,
just give it before you go on
a lot of times.
Okay, give an example of what you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the other day when they lost the game, there was no reason, but he stayed in the dugout and he slumped over the front rail of the dugout, and that looks bad not only for your team, which is leaving the dugout and watching you just slumped, but during games when an umpire makes a decision in the cameras are always on the manager, the coaches, and it just, he needs to work on that. You remember Cito Gaston got criticized for never showing any emotion in the dugout. It was like he was stoic all the time, and that was interpreted as he's not doing anything. Well, I think Schneider would be better off being stoic than what he is right now in terms of just reacting to everything and like looking befuddled and lost. But in terms of overall, yeah, you can't fire John Schneider, because we all know the amount of information that he's been given by the front office before a game starts, and how he has to implement that, how his bullpen has been devastated, and now he's down to his 3rd and 4th closers and setup men, and how the offense doesn't score any runs. So how can you blame that on the manager? It's got to be higher than that. It's got to be the front office. It's got to be the GM. It's got to be the development people, but not the manager in the dugout. It's just that he's not doing himself any favors by the way he reacts.
Yeah. So you got me thinking about Cito, and dugouts were configured differently back then, right? They didn't have the steps and the railings and the netting that you could kind of sit on the upper benches of the dugout and be protected from foul balls. So, but Cito was always a sitter.
Yeah.
Right? Like he would, you remember that one of the things Skydome had back in the day that was so new was the TV screens,
Right.
where you could watch
The
the
bullpen
bullpen
warming up.
if you wanted. And Cito would always sit right beside in the corner in that TV. And I think the sitting is what a lot of people, he's not doing anything. Well, he's a sitter, he's not pacing. I mean, what do you want him to look busy pacing the dugout? Like, what do you want?
And then that was followed by anybody could manage this team. You just put those guys on the lineup. You put the lineup in, and you sit back and you win a game.
Well, it was pretty clear that not just anybody could manage the '89 team, or Jimmy Williams wouldn't have gotten fired after losing 24 of the first 36 games. Like,
yeah, no, there's far more to it than that, and anyone who's follows baseball closely knows that that's not the case, and that Cito got a bum rap there.
Yeah. Well, Griff, I don't know if we solved any of the world's problems, but we certainly spoke about the world's problems.
I got two short items here. Does anyone remember Joey Votto?
Who apparently hasn't been in the lineup.
Has not been. He went into one game
Wednesday.
Was 0 for 1 with a walk and was replaced at first base. And since then, there's been no mention from the front office, no mention, and like he hasn't been in a game since then. So,
Griff, the poor kid who didn't pick that bat up in the dugout in Dunedin.
Well, I've gone over that before. It's like a B game.
I know,
but and they had the split squad bat boys.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, I don't think that kid's going to be there next year.
No, not even for split squads.
Right.
Also, there was one other. Oh, fifth starter. We didn't talk about fifth starter. Would you give Yariel Rodriguez more rope? After disastrous start the other day.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that bothered me, and I don't know the answer to it, it would be when Varsho and Schneider miscommunicated and that leadoff fly ball to left field fell for a double.
That was huge.
It was horrible. It was horrible. It was a misplay. It happens once a year, twice a year to every team, and it was bad timing. My concern is that he then just lost everything and couldn't throw a strike, and he walked the world. To quote John Gibbons, Brad Lincoln down in Tampa Bay, hey, you can't walk the world, can he? And so is that just that he didn't have his stuff because he looked okay in the first inning? He didn't have his stuff, or was it that he lost his head and got thrown off, which is worrisome?
I mean, I want to look up the history of 10 plus pitch at bats because Josh Naylor, that was an 11 pitch at bat that ended up in the fly ball double, which wasn't a double. It was just a botched fly ball that was scored a double. But I swear that after 10 or 11 pitch at bats, if you study the next four hitters, that those at bats have more influence on a pitcher than we imagine, more effect moving forward. And then maybe they get a chance to reset between innings. But I'm going to look that up, and I'll have it for us on the next one. But in terms of Yariel Rodriguez, that was a game where the Blue Jays tried to get away with no run prevention on defense. They put their worst fielders at positions, thinking maybe Yariel is just going to give up a lot of fly balls, which he usually does, and it ended up costing them. And so that's why I said that they built this team on run prevention. They brought these kids up, and now they have neither. So we'll see. But I
wonder, Griff.
I would give Yariel at least as many starts as any fifth starter would get at this point.
I wonder if the attrition in the bullpen means they have to pivot and put Yariel down there. But then that changes the whole innings cap or what have you, and how are they going to be comfortable using Yariel on consecutive days if that's what's required? What if there's a 3 out of 4 situation? He's throwing an inning on back-to-back days, day off, go again, or an inning and then a day off and then 2 in a row, 3 out of 4. Like, so are they looking for kind of consistent pacing here? The alternative, of course, if you do that, is to put Bowden Francis back in the 5 slot in the rotation. And we know that didn't go well at the start of the year. He's been pitching better in that bulk role. They're just so thin. The options don't feel good.
Yeah. And then you look behind even Bowden Francis and Yariel, and there's not much down there. Adam Mako might be a guy, but he's at AA. And some of the numbers, I'd say none of the numbers at AAA and AA are encouraging at all in terms of the next step up. And you bring guys like Raymond Burr in, or Ryan, whatever his name is. Ryan Burr?
Ryan Burr? I think you're Ryan Burr,
yeah. Well, he pitched like Ironside, so I just don't see the depth in this organization this year. Maybe they just need to admit that to themselves as a front office that they will try and see what's going to be best in 2025. So that would free them up to do more different things. But right now, this is a disaster.
Yeah, and Ricky Tiedemann's not even in the conversation right now because he's working his way back to AAA. He's on a rehab assignment at Single A Dunedin, trying to get back to AAA, coming off of his latest minor league IL stint. So, I mean, if Tiedemann makes his major league debut this season, Griff, that means the next couple of months have gone really well for him.
Yeah, I thought he would at spring training. I was certain that he would at some point, but I'm not so certain right now that it would even be the best thing for him. So we'll see.
Right. With that, we'll put a wrap on things. This has been episode 25 of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. Griff and I will always communicate with you when we next decide to go live after a Blue Jays game on our YouTube page at youtube.com/Exit Philosophy. So stay tuned for that. We'll figure that out in the not too distant future. Griffsthepitch.com is where Griff's entire catalog of work is located. Griffsthepitch.com, multiple weekly columns, a weekly MLB Power Rankings column, conversations like the one we've posted to our YouTube page at youtube.com/@exitphilosophy with Kevin Malone, a bunch of other former Expos, current and former Blue Jays, and the Exit Philosophy podcast is also posted to griffsthepitch.com. With that, thank you for listening, and we will be back next Monday. Let's hope the news is a little better for the Blue Jays between now and then.
Thanks, Scotty Mac. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Talk to you next week.